She had been standing at the edge of the post office steps for nearly 10 minutes before anyone noticed her. That alone told Harlan Beckett something. In a town like Caldwell, Kansas, in the year 1887, a woman standing still on a busy street corner was either lost, grieving, or both. Harlan, 52 years old, with the kind of face that had been weathered by 30 years of cattle work and one very hard marriage, noticed because noticing was something he had learned to do after Eleanor died. You started paying attention to things you used to walk right past. He was coming out of the feed store with a 50-pound sack over one shoulder and a list of repairs in his coat pocket when he saw her. She was young, that was the first thing. Maybe 24, maybe 25, wearing a brown traveling dress that had seen better days, holding a leather satchel against her side like it was the only thing in the world she still owned, which, as it turned out, it nearly was. He kept walking. That's the honest truth of it. He kept walking because a man alone with 3 children and a ranch that was barely holding together doesn't go looking for complications. He had enough. He made it all the way to his wagon before he stopped. There was something in the way she was standing. Not defeated, exactly. More like a woman who had been told the road ahead was washed out and was trying, very quietly, to figure out which direction was still passable. He had seen that look before. He'd seen it in the mirror the winter after Eleanor passed. He set down the feed sack. He walked back. Her name was Bette Callahan, 26 years old, from Lexington, Missouri. She told him that much in the first 30 seconds, before she seemed to realize she was telling a stranger anything at all. And then she stopped and looked at him with the particular wariness of a woman who has learned that kindness from men she doesn't know usually costs something. Harlan held up one hand. "I'm not selling anything," he said, "and I'm not looking for anything either. You just looked like somebody who could use a cup of coffee and a place to sit down." She considered that for a moment. Then she said, "Is there somewhere in this town that serves decent coffee?" "No," he said, "but there's a bench outside the dry goods store that's in the shade." She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way, but it was there. They sat on that bench for 20 minutes. She told him she had come from Missouri following her cousin, the only family she had left after her mother passed in February, and her father the winter before that. 2 losses in less than 4 months. She said it plainly, the way people do when grief has been with them long enough to stop being a visitor and start being a permanent resident. Her cousin had written her a letter in March, said there was work in Caldwell, said she could come and stay until she got settled. Bette, 26 and alone and out of better options, had packed everything she owned, sold the rest, and boarded a train heading west. The cousin, she had discovered this morning, had left Caldwell 3 weeks ago. Nobody seemed to know exactly where she'd gone. There had been a man involved, somebody said. There usually was. "So," Bette said, setting her hands flat on her knees in a way that looked like she was steadying herself, "I'm here, and I have $6.40, and I don't know a single person in this town." Harlan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What kind of work were you doing back in Missouri?" "School teaching," she said. 2 years. Before that, I helped my mother run the household. Cooking, mending, keeping accounts." He nodded slowly. He was thinking about something, and she could see it, the way his eyes went a little distant and focused at the same time. "I'm not offering anything improper," he said, which was exactly the right thing to say, because it meant he had already thought about how it might sound. "But I've got 3 children who haven't had a steady hand in the house since their mother died 14 months ago. My oldest is 11. My middle one is 9. My youngest just turned 6 last month, and she cries at night, and I don't always know how to help her." He stopped, looked out at the street. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said. "The ranch is. It's surviving. I could offer you room and board, a small wage, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know how small is yet, because I'd have to look at the books tonight." Bette studied him. He was somewhere in his 50s, she guessed. 52, though she didn't know that yet, with a kind of quiet that wasn't emptiness but patience, broad-shouldered, tired around the eyes, in the way that had nothing to do with sleep. "What's your name?" she asked. "How far is your ranch, mister?" "Beckett?" 4 miles north. Nice land. Dry summers, but the creek doesn't run out. She was quiet for a long moment. $6.40. A cousin who had disappeared. A town full of strangers. "I'd want my own room," she said. "You'd have it. And if it doesn't work out, I'd want a month's notice. Either direction. That's fair." She stood up, picked up her satchel, and looked at him with those careful, measuring eyes. "All right, Mr. Beckett," she said. "Let's see what the books say." The 3 children were named Isaac, 11, Peter, 9, and the youngest was Lottie, 6 years old, with her dead mother's red hair and a habit of asking questions that nobody had good answers for. Lottie was the one who walked up to Bette within the first 5 minutes of her arrival, looked her directly in the face with the honest, unfiltered gaze of a child who has not yet learned that staring is considered impolite, and said, "Are you going to stay?" "I'm going to try," Bette said. "That's what the last one said." Lottie told her and walked away. Isaac, 11, was polite in the careful, formal way of a boy who had decided that being polite was a kind of armor. He showed Bette to her room, which was clean and small and had a window that looked out over the prairie, and told her where the kitchen things were kept, and then excused himself to go help his father with the evening feeding. He moved through the house like a small foreman who had been doing the job too long. Peter, 9, was the one who asked her if she knew how to make cornbread. "I do," she said. "Good," he said, "because Isaac keeps burning it." The first 2 weeks were about logistics. That was the honest truth of it. There was too much to be done, and the doing of it left little room for anything else. Bette was up before the children every morning, had breakfast started by the time Harlan came in from the first round of chores, and had a system for the laundry established by the end of the first week that was more efficient than anything the household had been running on before. Harlan watched this happening and didn't say much about it. That was his way. She was learning. He was not a man who filled silence with words. But he noticed things. She'd find small accommodations appearing. The water barrel moved closer to the kitchen door, a new hook installed near the back entry for the children's coats, a better lamp set on the table where she did the mending in the evenings. He never mentioned doing any of it. She mentioned it once. "You moved the water barrel," she said. "It made more sense closer to the door," he said, and went back to the harness he was repairing. She stood there for a second, looking at the side of his face, and thought, "This is a man who shows things instead of saying them." She filed that away. It seemed important to know. The trouble with Isaac started in the 3rd week. He wasn't cruel about it. He was 11 years old and trying to protect something, and Bette understood that even when it was directed at her. He started leaving his chores half done in ways that were clearly deliberate. He stopped speaking to her at meal times. One morning, she found the eggs she'd set aside for baking hidden behind the flour sacks. She didn't tell Harlan. That seemed important. That she handle it herself first. That she not run to his father like a complaint. She found Isaac in the barn that afternoon, cleaning tack that didn't need cleaning, which was his version of being somewhere else. She sat down on a hay bale across from him and said nothing. Waited. He lasted about 4 minutes before he said, "I know what you're doing." "What am I doing?" she asked. "You're trying to make us like you so you can stay." "I'm not trying to make you like me," she said. "I'm just doing the job your father hired me to do." "He's going to try to marry you," Isaac said. His jaw was tight. He was 11 years old, and he looked like a man carrying something too heavy. He did it with the last one, too. And she left, and Lottie cried for 2 weeks. Bette was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm not going to make you any promises about the future because I don't know the future. But I'll tell you what I can promise. I'm not here to replace your mother. Nobody could do that. and if things change and I have to leave, I'll tell you first. Not your father. You." Isaac looked at her. Something shifted slightly in his face. Not resolution, but the beginning of it. "She used to braid Lottie's hair," he said. "Nobody's done it right since she died." Bette nodded. "I can learn how she liked it," she said, "if Lottie wants to show me." Now I want to stop here for just a moment, friends, because this is the part of the story where I always wonder something. I wonder where you are sitting right now, listening to this. Maybe you're in a farmhouse in Iowa, or a city apartment in Texas, or maybe you're halfway across the world entirely. If you're listening from outside the United States, I want you to drop a comment down below and tell me where you're from. And if this story is speaking to something in you, if you know what it feels like to start over in a place where nobody knows your name, then give this video a like, because that tells me to keep telling stories like this one. All right, let's go back to Bette and Harlan. It was Lottie who undid her first. Lottie, 6 years old, small and red-haired and relentless, climbed into the chair beside her one evening while Bette was doing the accounts ledger and said, "Do you miss your mother?" Bette's pen stopped moving. "Yes," she said. "Every day." "Me too," Lottie said, very simply. Then she leaned against Bette's arm, just leaned, the way small children do when they've decided that a person is safe. She didn't say anything else. She just stayed there. Bette did not cry. She finished the page she was working on, each number careful and correct. But her hand was not entirely steady. Later that night, after the children were in bed, she was washing the supper dishes when Harlan came in from the barn. He poured himself a cup of coffee, sat down at the table, and said nothing for a while. That was normal. What was not normal was that he spoke next. "Thank you," he said, "for what you did with Isaac. He talked to you. He asked me if you were planning to leave." Harlan set his cup down. "I told him I didn't know, which is the truth." He looked at her steadily. "Are you?" She turned from the dishes and looked at him. 52 years old, sitting at his kitchen table with his big, tired hands wrapped around a coffee cup, asking a question that was about so many more things than staying or leaving. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said. "But that's not the reason I'd stay, if I stay." "What is the reason?" he asked. She thought about Lottie leaning against her arm. She thought about Peter asking for cornbread. She thought about Isaac, 11, with that jaw set like a little general trying to protect a fort he was too young to be guarding. "I think those 3 children need something steadier than luck," she said, "and I think I might be able to give it to them." Harlan was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. It was the kind of nod that meant something. The summer moved forward the way summers do on the Kansas prairie, slowly in the heat of the day, faster in the evenings when the light went long and gold across the grass. Bette learned the rhythm of the ranch the way you learn a piece of music, one bar at a time until you don't have to think about it anymore. She learned that Harlan was up at 4:30 every morning and would not speak to anyone meaningfully until he'd had his first cup of coffee. She learned that Peter, 9, had a head for numbers that was remarkable for his age and would benefit from being challenged. She started giving him sums at breakfast, bigger ones every week, and watched him brighten in a way that had nothing to do with the food. She learned that Isaac, 11, was slowly deciding to trust her, which was a thing he did not do quickly or all at once but in small, almost invisible increments. One morning, he fixed the fence post without being asked. One afternoon, he told her, without preamble, that she made biscuits better than the woman before. It was the highest compliment she had received in months. She learned that Harlan Beckett, 52, was not a lonely man by nature, but had become one by circumstance. That there was a whole version of him that came out occasionally in the evenings. A quiet humor, a sharpness of mind that surprised her. Observations about the land and the cattle and the way the sky was moving that were the kind of thing a person noticed when they had been paying attention to the same piece of earth for a long time. She did not plan to fall in love with him. It was not a thing she was looking for. She was 26 years old and had lost her parents and been abandoned by the one family member she had left, and what she was looking for was ground under her feet. Solid, reliable ground. The problem with Harlan Beckett was that he was exactly that. It was an August evening, nearly 3 months after she'd arrived, when something shifted. She had taken Lottie out to the creek after supper. Lottie, 6, had developed a habit of collecting interesting stones and had found what she described as a very important rock that she needed to show Bette immediately. They were sitting at the edge of the water with their shoes off when Harlan came down the bank and sat on a flat stone nearby without saying anything. In that way, he had. They sat there for a while, the three of them, watching the creek move and listening to Lottie explain at length why this particular rock was special. The light was going pink over the hills. The air smelled like dust and grass and cool water. After a while, Lottie fell asleep against Bette's side, the important rock clutched in one fist. Harlan said quietly, "You didn't have to come out here with her." "I know," Bette said. "You've been going beyond what I hired you for. Most days." She looked at him. "I know that too." He was quiet. The creek moved. Then he said, "I'm 52 years old, Bette. That's—" He stopped, looked down at his hands. "That's too old for certain kinds of foolishness." She understood what he was saying. She also understood that he wasn't sure it was foolishness, and that was exactly why he was bringing it up. "My father was 54 when he married my mother," she said. "She was 22. He used to say she kept him young enough to be useful." Harlan was quiet for a long time. "Then what did your mother say?" Bette smiled, just a little. She said he'd have been insufferable to live with if she'd been his own age. Something in Harlan's face changed. Not a smile, exactly, but the possibility of one. He didn't say anything more about it that evening. He carried Lottie back to the house and put her to bed, and when he came downstairs, Bette was already in the parlor with her mending, and he went back out to do the last of the evening checks, and the day ended the way most days ended, quietly, in the dark, with the prairie wind moving against the windows. But things were different after that evening. Both of them knew it. The air between them had changed in the way that air does when something has been named, even indirectly. It was Peter, 9, who made everyone's feelings clear without meaning to. One afternoon at the table, looking up from his arithmetic with the direct, uncomplicated logic of a 9-year-old, he said, "Papa, if you married Miss Bette, she could stay forever." Isaac, 11, looked up sharply. Bette went very still. Harlan set down his coffee cup with great deliberateness and said, "Finish your sums, Peter." "I'm just saying," Peter said, returning to his arithmetic without the slightest indication that he found this exchange unusual. That night, Harlan Beckett knocked on the parlor door, which he had never done before. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands. The hat was a sign. She'd learned. He only held it when he was uncertain, and said, "I'd like to speak plainly, if that's all right." "All right," she said. "I'm 52. You're 26. I know how that looks." "I'm not particularly concerned with how things look," she said. "I'm not a smooth-talking man. I know, and I can't promise the ranch won't have hard years." "Mr. Beckett," she said. "Harlan, I have had nothing but hard years. I'm not afraid of hard years. What I'm afraid of is—" she paused. "What I'm afraid of is being alone again, and I have been lonelier in places with more people than I've been in this house." He looked at her for a long moment. The hat rotated slowly in his hands. "Then I'd like to ask you," he said carefully, "if you would consider the possibility of staying. Permanently. As my wife. If you'd have me." Bette was quiet for a moment. Outside, the prairie wind moved against the glass. She could hear Peter and Isaac talking in the room above, that low boyish rumble of children who are supposed to be asleep. "Asks me again in the morning," she said, "when you're not holding your hat." He looked down at his hat. Something shifted in his face, that almost smile she'd been seeing more of lately. He set the hat down on the side table. "Will you marry me?" he said. She said yes. The wedding was small, which was to say it was exactly the right size. The pastor from the Caldwell First Methodist Church came out to the ranch on a Saturday in October. Bette wore her best dress, which was blue wool, and Lottie, 6, carried a bunch of late-season wildflowers she had picked herself from the edge of the meadow and presented with tremendous seriousness. Isaac, 11, stood beside his father with his arms straight at his sides and his face posed, and if he was feeling anything complicated, he kept it to himself until afterward, when the small gathering had eaten and the pastor had gone and the afternoon light was going long. Then he came and stood beside Betty at the kitchen window, where she was washing the cups, and said without looking at her, "I'm glad you stayed." She didn't make a big thing of it. She just said, "Me too, Isaac," and handed him a cup to dry. Peter, 9, had made the most detailed investigation into the wedding cake and had opinions about the frosting that he was not shy about sharing. Harlan, 52, watched his 3 children in that quiet, steady way he had, and once across the room caught Bette's eye, and something passed between them that didn't need words. That first kitchen garden was her project, the following spring. She'd been thinking about it since October, knew exactly where the light was best, had already talked to the woman at the dry goods store about seeds. By April, she had a plan laid out in the dirt, and Peter, 9, helping her measure the rows with a length of string, asking questions about soil and drainage that were technically beyond his years and to which she gave honest answers. Harlan built her the raised beds she'd drawn in the margins of the account ledger. He built them without being asked, the same way he'd moved the water barrel, the same way he'd put in the hook for the children's coats. She found them one morning when she came out to the garden, and she stood there looking at them for a long moment. "You didn't have to do that," she said at dinner. "I know," he said. He said it exactly the way she'd said it at the creek. That August evening, when he'd told her she didn't have to come out with Lottie. She recognized it for what it was, the language of a man who showed things instead of saying them turned back around. She understood him by then. I think about Bette Callahan, 26 years old, standing outside that post office in Caldwell, Kansas, in 1887. $6.40 and no one to call her own. I think about how easy it would have been for things to go differently. For Harlan Beckett, 52, to have kept walking to his wagon and driven home. For her to have gotten back on a train heading anywhere. For those 3 children to have grown up with that hollow place in the middle of their house where a steady hand should have been. What made someone a real family? One of the comments I read once said it better than I ever could. Blood, or the people who choose to stay when everyone else leaves. I think Bette and Harlan built theirs out of the second kind. They built it out of a bench in the shade and a conversation about coffee, out of cornbread and braided hair and arithmetic at breakfast, out of a hat held in both hands at a parlor door. Out of choosing, over and over, to stay. Friends, thank you for riding along with this one. I hope wherever you are sitting tonight, there is something warm nearby and someone you love within reach. And if there isn't, if you're one of the ones who's standing at the edge of your own post office steps, looking at a road that got washed out, remember that sometimes a stranger sets down what he's carrying and walks back. It happens. More than you'd think. God bless you all. Keep riding, Prairie Hearts. Keep riding.